everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Needy Meds special topic webinar, Alcohol in Your Liver, presented by the American Liver Foundation. I'm Carla, the Director of User Engagement at Needy Meds. And before we kick off the presentation, I'm going to offer a few tips which will help you, I hope, make the most out of today's presentation. So if you do have questions, you can feel free to ask them at any time by typing them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel. Just know we will reserve answering questions until the end. If we don't have the time to answer your question, we will follow up with you by email. But of course, we will also provide the contact information for both Needy Meds and the American Liver Foundation. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Needy Meds YouTube channel. And as you saw on the screen a few moments ago, we did upload some materials we thought you'd be interested into that handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started with what is Needy Meds. For those of you not familiar with us, what you're looking at is our mission statement. But simply put, Needy Meds connects people to programs that help them afford their healthcare expenses. And we do that free and anonymously through our website, needymeds.org, and our helpline, 1-800-503-6897. And as I said, I will put this contact information up again at the end of the presentation. And I do always like to put a screenshot of our homepage. For those of you that attend our webinars, you're familiar with that. And I do that because our website really is the face of our organization, and also because it gives me a chance to point out just a few things. For example, if you are turning to Needy Meds for healthcare savings resources, you can go ahead and begin your search for what you may need under the aptly named Healthcare Savings tab. I mentioned in the beginning that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, and you can find a link to that. Oh, I got ahead of myself. You can find a link to that on the top right, that just popped up, with the rest of the social media icons. On the bottom right, you can see there's also a box around that calendar of events. That is another destination on needymeds.org where you can also find other upcoming webinars and events. So please do check that out. So let's move on to why everybody's here today, which is to talk about alcohol and your liver with our guests from the American Liver Foundation. If you're not familiar with the American Liver Foundation, I really suggest you check out their website, because not only is it chock full of reliable, current information, but it's really easy to negotiate and find what you need, as you can see with that screenshot of their homepage that you're looking at right now. So the American Liver Foundation has a mission to facilitate, advocate, and promote education, support, and research for the prevention, treatment, and cure of liver disease. And today we have our guest and my friend Warren Hall from the American Liver Foundation, who is their National Manager of Support Services. He came to the American Liver Foundation with a background in education and counseling, and both come in very handy in his work on the helpline and with the Foundation's ongoing support services. Last year alone, the National Helpline assisted over 10,000 inquiries regarding liver health, liver disease, and related issues. So let's transition to today's presentation. Drinking too much alcohol can take a serious toll on your health and cause temporary or permanent liver damage. Warren's going to help us understand why a healthy liver is important to overall good health and how you can avoid alcohol-related liver disease. So without further ado, and I always say this, hopefully seamlessly, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic and the screen to Warren. As he grabs that and opens up his deck, I will remind everybody once again that if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in to that question section of your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as possible at the end of today's presentation. So Warren, your screen is up. It looks great. We can see you, so I'll go ahead and pass the mic to you. Thanks for being here, Warren, and thanks to our audience for joining us. Have a good one.
Great. Well, thank you, Cara, so much. I just for a few moments, I want you to see me because I want you to know that that's a real picture that was put up there. That that's really kind of what I look like. But I love our partnership and relationship with Needy Meds. We, in our work on the at the American Liver Foundation, most especially on our helpline, we very often refer people to Needy Meds because of all the wonderful programs that Needy Meds is able to offer folks in so many different ways. So so it's really wonderful to be here with my friend Carla as well, and the relationship is so important to us, and we always look forward to not only these events, but many other ways that we all interact with each other. So we're so happy that all of you are here attending, and those who will be watching this on the YouTube channel, that you are here with us today as well. Now, I'm wearing a headset because I'm coming to you from Manhattan in New York City. And I live in a section, it's in the north part of the city, it's called Washington Heights. Now, like many neighborhoods in New York City, the ethnic group that is in this area is Dominican. And we have some wonderful Dominican restaurants and the Dominican culture, a big part of which is Dominican music. And, you know, there was a movie that was put out recently called In the Heights. And in that, it was about this neighborhood. And in there, they said, there's always music in the air. And that's true. And unfortunately, it's in the air when I try to do some of these programs. So, so I'm
Perfect timing.
Yeah, so I'm using my headset so that you can focus on me and that you'll be able to hear much clearly. So I'm now going to disappear. I think I will do that right. Okay. And so hopefully you can all now see the beginning of my presentation. Now,
yeah, it's good to go, Warren.
thank you. So yeah, so you know, a couple things, and Carla mentioned the mission. You know, so often we get questions about what does a group like the American Liver Foundation do? We get a lot of calls like that. One of my areas of responsibility is our helpline, and people ask that. And so as you can see on the screen there, organizations such as ours, we always say that, first of all, we're not doctors. So when people call us or they get our information from us, we're not doctors. We have a medical advisory board, and we have physicians who are involved in every aspect of the American Liver Foundation. They review all of our educational materials. They create most of them. And if you go to the American Liver Foundation YouTube channel, you'll see many of those programs that are done by physicians. But the program that we're going to do today, we call this a community education program. And so that's why I'll be with you today going over this information. And so as we always say, is that the information we present here is rather general and what we'll call high level. And so therefore, any concerns that you may have about yourself or a loved one, we invite you to speak to your own healthcare providers about that, or go to those folks who would be more specifically involved in whatever your concern is. But so having said that, again, I'm very happy to be here, and this is one of the more enjoyable aspects of my work at the Liver Foundation because of my background in education, and I kind of get to be a teacher here for a little bit of time. So what we're going to do first, and I always think it's good for us to do this, and that is let's discuss exactly what the liver itself does. And I'm going to try to advance my screen here. There we go. And so, so what does the liver itself do? Probably most people would say that the liver is a filter, and that indeed is what it does. It's about the size of, we always say, the size of like a little small football, kind of folded in half, as you can see in the diagram there. And it's located under your right rib cage, so much of the liver is protected by the lower part of our ribs. When you go to the doctor, and if the doctor during his or her physical may have you lean back, and they'll say inhale, and then they push their hand kind of underneath the rib cage. That's what they're checking. They're checking for your liver to see if there's any enlargement or anything like that. So a healthy liver, and true to the colors that you see there, a healthy liver is nice and smooth. It's soft. It's kind of like a squishy sponge, because as a filter, that's indeed what it is. Um, and you can see that it is related to a couple of the other organs that are around it. The stomach, the gallbladder is that little green pocket that's there, or pouch, I should say. One of the things that the liver does is that it produces bile, and we know bile is that acid that gets released when we eat something or drink something. Our body gives a signal to the gallbladder to say, okay, we need to get going here with digestion, and that gallbladder will then secrete the bile into the stomach and the small intestines, where the breakdown takes place. And so, we'll say that the liver has as many as 500 functions that it does. It performs these functions in and of itself, such as I mentioned, the production of bile, but it also does it as part of a system. And all of our body organs are broken into systems. Digestive system, which is what the liver is a part of, and so we see how the liver then interacts with some and provides functions as a part of this system. So along with that processing, you'll see that everything that we eat, that we drink, that we breathe, and even then, this one is usually not something people think about, but whatever gets absorbed into our skin makes its way into our bloodstream, and our blood eventually makes its way through the liver to be filtered. And when you think about that with through the skin, that's the purpose, right? When we use various products for moisturizing or sun protection, things like that, the goal is that we want it to absorb, but then we have to realize that it goes somewhere. And that is, it gets absorbed to the skin, then goes into the bloodstream, and it gets filtered through our liver. That's why we need to be careful. It's easy to think about eating good food, drinking things that are pure, and that are not going to be harmful to us, and certainly with air we breathe, right? We know that we want clean air, but we also have to realize that some of those things that we rub into our skin, we want those to be equally as clean and not harmful. Continuing on, the more part of the liver's processing is that it's involved in the production of red blood cells and white blood cells, and therefore it helps in the buildup of muscle. I mentioned bile, and again, with the clotting factors that we find in our blood, the liver is involved in helping anytime we get cut, for the good clots to happen, to slow and stop the bleeding that we may experience. And then it kills germs, detoxifies substances harmful to your body. When we think of these substances, now none of us will eat poison, certainly not knowing it. But if we think about some of the foods that we eat, there's so many additives and preservatives and all the hormones and all these things that are not necessarily natural, but they're part of the food we eat in our food supply. And so part of the function of our liver is that when we're digesting, the liver tries to pull out a lot of those substances that are not natural, or might in and of themselves be harmful to us. There's another program that we do for Needy Meds, and that's called our Liver Health and Wellness, and we'll get more into that in that particular program. But just realize all these many functions that that the liver does. Now, I always include these two of the really unique aspects of the liver. This is something that caught my attention many, many years ago and piqued my interest in the liver and its functionings. The first thing to know is that the liver as an organ does not have any nerve endings. And now this is, I'll give you the pro and con of this. The pro is that throughout our lives, we're always kind of beating up our liver. As I mentioned, sometimes the things we eat, sometimes the things we drink, a lot of these things, although not necessarily harmful to us in general, do create some challenges for the liver that is trying to withdraw them or get them out of our bodies. And so we kind of beat up our liver, but the liver, in number two, you'll see there, the liver has this ability to heal and to regenerate itself. Now, what that means is that our liver, no matter how much we beat it up, is always seeking health. So it's always trying to be healthy. If there are cells that are being damaged because of lifestyle or medications or disease, the liver is always going to try to fight to keep the liver healthy as possible. Now, as we know, there is liver disease, and so the way that happens is when the disease begins to overpower the liver's own ability to heal itself. That's when we get into disease progression. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Now, as I mentioned, the liver does not have any nerve endings, and that's a good thing because this process of healing and regenerating is going on, and we don't even know it. The negative or the con side of this is that once disease begins to develop, quite often we don't know that either. Because, in our bodies, pain is always a sign that something's wrong, right? If we feel a pain in different parts of our body, if that pain lingers, we would go to see a doctor and find out what's causing it, because our bodies should be kind of in a harmony where we're not feeling anything untoward, such as pain or discomfort. But when we do feel pain, it makes us go look in to see what's wrong. Now, because the liver doesn't have any nerve endings, it's not going to tell us when it is becoming diseased or when that disease is progressing. And this is why people can have liver disease, and they can have a pretty extensive liver disease and not even know it. This is why part of what the American Liver Foundation tries to do is to get the word out that people should be screened for liver disease. And as we know that when we're screened for something, it means you go look for it, right? If we get screened for hepatitis, a viral hepatitis, we go to look, see, oh, does our body have this? Colon cancer, right? We all know, especially those of us of a certain age, that at a certain point, the recommendation is for colonoscopies because we have to go and actually see if there is anything that's developing. Well, the same is true for the liver. Along with the liver enzyme function test, that's the blood work that we do to see what the liver enzyme levels are. We also believe that people who may consider themselves in a high risk group get some sort of a scan, because most liver disease is visible, and so it can be seen. Quite often, liver disease is discovered by what we'll say is accident. And that means that, let's say they're having a scan of the abdomen because of something else. The doctor may think somebody has gallstones, or a woman is pregnant, right? And they're doing the scan to check on the pregnancy, and then all of a sudden the doctor will say, "Oh, look, we see that there's something going on with the liver." And so by accident is how people often find out that there's a liver challenge, but we don't want to leave anything to chance or to accidents when it comes to our health. And so therefore, being screened for liver disease, or we'll put that in the positive spin, being screened for our liver health is something that all of us should definitely consider doing. But again, these two unique aspects of the liver do make this a really unique organ in our body system. And now, before I move on, I just want to say that, that ability the liver has to heal and regenerate itself is also why we can do what are called living donor transplants. Now, we all know that of deceased donor transplant, right? So when somebody passes on, hopefully that person and all of us hopefully are organ donors. And therefore, when a organ becomes available, it can be transplanted to a person who is in need, who has severe liver disease. But also, over the past few years, the idea of this living donor procedure is becoming more and more widely used and favored, where they can take a piece of a person's healthy liver, they can transplant that into the person who needs it, and in both cases, immediately, the liver begins to heal, to regenerate itself, it begins to grow, it begins to get up to its full functioning, and that happens over a period of a few months. So it's really amazing, and that aspect of the liver also leads to many other potential healths moving ahead in the future. But again, I just wanted to mention that because I do think that this is two very unique aspects of the liver. So now, so let's get into progression of liver disease in general. Okay, so when a person has liver disease, now it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't matter how you get it, and so there are many things that can cause liver disease. For our purposes today, we're going to get into a bit about how alcohol affects our liver, but you know, in some cases that's a stigma, and part of what we're trying to do with the Liver Foundation is to remove that stigma that, oh, if it's only alcohol that causes liver disease. And that's not true, because there are many other things: poor diet, obesity, long-term use of certain medications. All of these things, genetic, what we call autoimmune diseases, autoimmune hepatitis, primary biliary cholangitis, PBC, and there's a few others that can cause the progression of liver disease. But once a person has a disease of the liver, it follows along in these stages. And so therefore, it doesn't matter how you got it. This is what the path of the damage is going to be. And as you can see, it's done with these little pictures here, so we can see that nice healthy liver, right? Nice, soft, squishy organ filter. And then as the progression happens, and it is a progression, and it's a slow progression, but indeed the liver can get diseased, and it can move from either fatty liver or fibrosis. Fibrosis is hardening, so now that nice squishy liver begins to get dense, and that's going to affect its filtering and its ability to do its work. And if there's not an intervention in some way to take care of that underlying condition or what's causing this, it's going to progress, and it's going to get to that severe stage of what we call cirrhosis that you see on the right. And now you can see that this nice, smooth liver has deteriorated. And now the liver, it's beginning to even break apart. And it's getting inflammation, which means that it's expanding, it's swelling, and all these things then are going to lead ultimately to what we call liver failure. And that means that the liver no longer is doing its work. And sadly, we can't live without our liver. And so, so I just wanted to show you that this is the progression. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a little while when we do get into specifically about how does alcohol itself now begin to create the problem. All right, so alcohol. So what do we know about alcohol as a substance? Okay, there's a few different names for it. You know, we call it alcohol. Sometimes it's called ethyl alcohol or ethanol. And this is made when yeast ferments. So that means that when yeast begins to break down with oxygen, and it literally changes whether it's hops or whatever kind of wheat or corn or whatever it is, the rye that we know is used in making whiskey. When this ferments, it breaks down, and then this becomes alcohol. And this is what the, if to use a phrase as it says there, the intoxicating ingredient that we find in all alcohol, whether it's beer, wine, or liquor. And one thing that we are going to repeat a few different times is it doesn't matter what the alcohol is. Okay, your liver doesn't know the difference whether you're drinking beer or wine or hard liquor. Your liver doesn't know that. All your liver knows is that it's alcohol, and so therefore that's why you'll see where we have up in the corner there, it says one type of alcohol is not better or worse than another. So we need to be careful overall in our consumption of alcohol. And so because of the nature of alcohol and its corrosive nature, really, so to speak, there are a number of different health issues that extensive use of alcohol can cause. Now, as I said, for our purpose here, we're going to talk about liver cirrhosis, but there are many other um, things that can happen in our body. The alcohol affects our nervous system, right? It's a depressant, and that's why the sort of the irony is that when people are depressed, because they don't want to feel that way, they will drink alcohol because they, quote unquote, want to feel better. And that might happen more immediately, but ultimately alcohol is a depressant. And so there's going to be that coming down after the alcohol use stops. And so it's actually having the complete opposite effect of what people believe that it's doing. Now, alcohol, because of the nature of it having been fermented, it gets absorbed very rapidly in our stomach and in the small intestine. And when that happens, it goes right into our bloodstream. Okay, that's why some people, even after just a few sips of alcohol, already begin to feel it. And that's because it gets absorbed very, very quickly into our body. And then once it gets into our stomach and the intestines, the enzymes or the bile, remember I mentioned the bile, begins to the phrase we use is metabolize. It begins to break it down. And then once it's broken down, again, it then gets filtered through the bloodstream and ultimately makes its way into our liver. Now, as you can see here, the liver can process only about 1 drink per hour. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about binge drinking or heavy drinking in a few moments, but so just keep this idea in mind that 1 drink an hour is safely the only amount that our liver can process immediately. Anything above that, it's going to float around our blood system until the liver then has the ability to process it. That's why, often if somebody is thought to be intoxicated, they check the amount of alcohol in the blood, because that alcohol is waiting to be processed. And so when those numbers are high, well, then a person can be then considered to be intoxicated, okay, because that person has more alcohol in their system than their liver can process. So now, what is 1 drink? So this is a question, right? And usually it will have to do with the container that we use to drink it. And as you see here, each of these beer, malt liquor, wine, and distilled spirits, this is 1 drink. Although, as you can see, the serving size are different. And the reason for that is that the alcohol content of those particular beverages are different. And so the more alcohol, the smaller the drink that we can actually have safely. Okay, if somebody is having a beer or a light beer, and we want to be careful with that, because people think because a beer is called a light beer that it has less alcohol, and that may not be the case. By light, they may be saying there's fewer calories. So you want to check what beverage it is that if you feel I only drink light beer, you want to make sure that the light part of it is referring to the alcohol and not just to the number of calories you're getting by drinking it. Okay, and so you can see there when we talk about having a drink, this is what we're talking about. Now, remember we said that the liver can process one of these drinks per hour. Now, most people, I know here in New York City where I live, there's always signs out that say happy hour, right? 2 for 1 drinks. Well, and usually those happy hours, to be quite honest, are 2 hours or even longer. I've seen a sign that says all day happy hour. That's almost really encouraging people to overdrink, right? To drink more than what they really should be doing. And you know what? If the alcohol is a lower price or half price, people want to get their money's worth for it, and they will overdrink. But keep that in mind. I know there are some cities around the country who have banned this idea of happy hours because they feel that it is encouraging over drinking. But as I said, here in New York City, that's not the case, and so it's up to the individual to be careful that they are not over drinking. Now, a couple of things that to keep in mind, as I said, depending upon, you may ask for a glass of wine and it comes in a wine glass. Now, wine glasses are not all the same size, and so therefore, if you have a larger wine glass and it's filled more, well, you're probably getting more than those 5 ounces of wine at 12% of the alcohol, right? The same is true the famous red Solo cups that we see at backyard barbecues and things like that. If somebody fills a glass or fills one of those red Solo cups with alcohol, it's way more than what you see on the screen here. And so we just want to be careful that the container that we're having the alcohol in is not going to cause us, without realizing it, to drink more than we want to. The other thing is that some people will ask about having a mixer, right? So not so much with beer, not so much with wine, although it can happen with wine too. But with some of the other spirits, people will have them either with some sort of a juice, right? An orange juice or a grapefruit juice, soda, a Coca-Cola. It doesn't matter how you have your alcohol. It's the same amount of alcohol. Okay, and so therefore, what happens in some of those drinks, and if you want to say a positive side, is that it might be slower to be drinking it. So if you have a drink mixed with, say, orange juice, you may just sip at it over time, and again, that's going to be a good thing because of the time element. But the alcohol is the alcohol, so it doesn't matter how much mixer you have in it. It's going to be the same amount of rum or vodka or whatever it is that we are having. And so therefore, awareness is a big thing. And I should say awareness at the beginning, because as we know, again, because of the fermented nature of alcohol, when we drink it, it can affect, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but it can affect some of our, not just our mood, but our thinking patterns. And so therefore, we begin to lose track of how much we're drinking, even if we may have started out wanting to just drink an acceptable amount. But then as we're drinking more and as a evening or whatever it is goes on, we'll tend to overdrink. And so awareness, especially at the beginning, is going to be very, very important for wanting to be careful of our alcohol intake. Now, alcohol is such a part of the American culture. And I'll be honest with you, it's part of the culture pretty much anywhere, except for some countries that may have some sort of prohibition, usually for religious reasons or whatever. But alcohol is a drinking culture. If you think about all the various events that happen where drinking is included, it's an awful lot. Happy occasions, right? Weddings and graduations, and we're always going to have a drink. Perhaps the beginning of a new year, right? It seems like it's a requirement to have that champagne. Even some of the sadder, perhaps following a funeral or something like that, where people will gather to be together, to support each other, and alcohol is brought into that mix. And so a drinking culture, we kind of define that as traditions and social behaviors that surround the consumption of alcohol. And I just mentioned a few of those. And so therefore, there's a lot of pressure for people to not only to have alcohol, but to have perhaps too much of it. And so awareness, once again, we have to be aware of what event we're at, what are we doing, and is alcohol going to be a part of that, and being careful that we're not harming our health in those particular circumstances. Uh, and here, some people will say, "Oh, just social drinking," right? That means that, oh, I, get together with my buddies after work. College campuses are known for this, and great care has to be taken when it comes to various types of parties and things. Business culture, right? Here in New York City, downtown in the financial district, right? It was the business lunches always included having a few drinks of some kind as a part of that, social gathering, and perhaps even to help a business deal to occur maybe a little more quickly or something like that. But as you see on the bottom here, alcohol is the most commonly used drug among adults in the United States. And, we often don't think of that, but alcohol is a drug. And so we want to be careful to know what a drug can do to us, especially if it's taken in too large a quantity. Now, we know because of history that there was a time period when in the United States, the drinking culture, the alcohol culture was thought to be harming society. And so there was the ban on alcohol. And as we know, it didn't last very long, right? Because people wanted to drink. People wanted to have alcohol, and so ultimately prohibition ended because of the demand that was happening in society for alcohol. And so therefore, we have to have an awareness of that. It's very easy to fall into that drinking culture. Um, okay, so patterns of drink. So how do we drink? How what are the patterns? Ideally, let me be clear. There are acceptable, even from the liver point of view. There is the acceptable amount of alcohol that we can have. And so the person who maybe comes in after work, somebody who after a long, hard day, they may have a glass of wine or a beer or have a drink of some kind, before dinner. Absolutely acceptable. The Mediterranean diet, which is the diet that is recommended for liver health and wellness, even the Mediterranean diet does allow for the use of a certain amount, a few ounces of alcohol. However, as I said, for many reasons, we tend to go way more than that. And so a couple of things we need to be careful of. As I mentioned before, your liver doesn't know the difference of what kind of drink you're having. It's all alcohol to the liver, and it all has to be processed. Um, People who have certain medical conditions, and if they're taking medications, now, many medications right on the label will say that you cannot take this medication with alcohol. Now, there's two reasons for that. One is that the actual alcohol can interfere in the effectiveness of the medication. And so the presence of alcohol when somebody takes a pill or some sort of medication, it could break it down too quickly, and the efficacy of that medication is diminished. The other thing is that in the liver, that's where our medication gets processed, right? Everything we eat, drink. Okay, so even the pill that we're taking goes into our liver, and if the presence of alcohol is there, it can once again interfere in the effectiveness of that. Um, certain things, certain health conditions, nerves, if people have high blood pressure. Okay, so many of these things, you got to be careful because it's going to create a problem for you. Underage drinking. Now, people say, oh, what does the age matter? Well, young people are still developing, all right? There's so many aspects of a young person's physiology that is still developing and growing and maturing, and the introduction of especially too much alcohol into that can stunt some of those developments from happening. And so we have to be really careful. People who are pregnant, well, clearly there are enough studies to show the impact on the person's unborn child. And so therefore, we need to be careful of that. And ultimately, as you see there, drinking alcohol excessively over time can lead somebody to have some sort of an alcohol use disorder, and we'll talk about in a bit. Now, there are differences in the how men and women metabolize alcohol, but the fact of the matter is that the amounts that we talked about before are the amounts that somebody needs to be careful of, and it's what they should be drinking. Okay, so awareness, awareness, awareness. Yes, men and women process it differently, but the standard is still the standard of 1 drink a day. Okay. So here, again, we talked about binge drinking, right? Because of the fact that if the liver can only process about an hour's, it takes about an hour to process a drink. Well, binge drinking is going to bring way more than that, and so we want to necessarily be careful of that. And so when we talk about binge drinking, what are we talking about? 5 or more drinks for men, 4 or more over that period of 2 or 3 hours. And then we get into heavy drinking. Some people feel this is splitting hairs, but it's actually true that for heavier drinking, as you can see, it's 3 times the amount that someone should be drinking, especially if they're a daily drinker. They need to just be careful. And again, this can lead to liver disease and ultimately can lead to an alcohol use disorder. So what is that we're talking about? So we've kind of defined it here. We get this information from the National Institutes of Health. And as you can see, excessive drinking, whether binge drinking or heavy drinking, can increase someone's use for an alcohol use disorder. This is indeed a medical diagnosis. Alcoholism was designated by the American Medical Association a number of years ago as a disease. And so, great care needs to be taken that we don't want to get into the particular area where we need to have alcohol, right? You'll hear somebody say, I need to have a drink. Well, in that case, if we need to have alcohol, there could be an issue that definitely does need to be looked at because it is definitely something that needs to be taken care of and hopefully backed away from because of the issues that it can cause physically as well as socially in terms of, as we say, the heavy use of alcohol affects not just the person drinking, but the people around them. And so we want to be careful of that. And so alcohol use disorder, we can see here the manual, the statistical manual of mental disorders. That's what DSM is. List this criteria as a way to evaluate if somebody has or feels they have an alcohol use disorder. And the amount of time spent drinking. Even look at how much money is being spent on alcohol. Can't stop when somebody starts. So all these criteria here that you see could be indications that somebody does have or is on the verge of an alcohol use disorder. And again, the more alcohol being used, the physiological effects, especially on the liver, that's going to happen. Okay, and here's some of the other the ways that alcohol impacts the body. Again, liver is for our purpose here, but the pancreas, our kidneys, the brain. Remember that alcohol that's not being processed, that's being basically held in our blood system, that's traveling through our brain. Again, that's why we lose our motor skills, right? Or people slur their words, okay? That means that the alcohol is going through the brain and it's creating some of those cognitive issues. The digestive system, a problem with many people with alcohol is that they don't eat properly. And so therefore, there's, they'll use the word starvation. Now we think of starvation differently, but, a lot of people who once they start drinking will not eat. And so there's a problem with getting the proper vitamins that they need to have. And then the heart and bloodstream. So you can see that many other aspects of our health are affected by the use of alcohol. Okay, so now specific to our liver, we talked about some of these. We just want to reinforce them here, and the fact that your liver, in order to break down alcohol and to remove it from your body, the liver needs water. Okay, and that this is why in a lot of the public service announcements, and even for some of the alcohol brands, we see them talking a lot about drinking water, right? So we want people to drink water, because the liver needs that to process it. When you're drinking alcohol, you're actually dehydrating your body. And when somebody has a hangover, right, the next day, what a hangover is, it's dehydration. Okay, that's because all the water that you had in your body was being used to try to break down the alcohol. And if you don't have enough water, or if you're dehydrated, that process becomes all the harder, and it throws off some of the other systems of our body, such as the nervous system, digestive system, as well as a few others. Okay, so there's that more immediate problem. Now, the next thing that you'll see here is that drinking more alcohol than your body can produce can cause a condition we call fatty liver disease. Now, fatty liver disease can also be caused by other things such as diet, and those are literally referred to as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. But fatty liver disease means that, literally as the name says, that fat deposits are now being developed in and around your liver. And if you think of your liver as a filter, those deposits of fat are going to be interfering in the actual work of your liver, and that progresses. Okay, and so as you can see here, excessive drinking causes this breakdown of the liver as an organ. Now, in the earlier stages, fatty liver disease can be reversed. It has to be taken very seriously, and it's all done through diet, because not just for fatty liver disease or alcohol-related liver disease, unfortunately, at this time, there are no medications to heal your liver. Okay, nutrition acts as a treatment, but there are no medical treatments. When somebody's liver is moving into fibrosis, which is the hardening, when it's moving into fatty liver, when it's moving into cirrhosis, unfortunately, in those later stages, there's no way to reverse it. The only way that a person's life can be saved is with a transplant. And so therefore, we have to be really careful of this. And as you can see here, there's that path, right? So the alcohol is creating fat. That fat is then making the liver dense with fibrosis, and then leads to cirrhosis, where it actually begins to affect the liver's functioning. Now, the word hepatitis, we probably know this. I should say anything HEPA, right? HEPA, anything medically related with HEPA is going to mean liver. So hepatitis literally means liver inflammation. Now, this is different from viral hepatitis. We know hepatitis A, B, C, D. Those are a little bit different. Those are viruses. But when we talk about alcohol-related hepatitis, this is actually inflammation and swelling of the liver that happens because of, in this case for our purpose today, overuse of alcohol. Okay, and so the positive side of this is that people can recover from this, right? So this swelling can come down, but as you see on the right, it's possible, but the person has to abstain from drinking. Okay, that's the only way, because in order for the liver to try to use its own healing ability, we have to remove the underlying health condition. In this case, it's going to be the alcohol. And so therefore, if somebody has alcohol-related hepatitis, if they go into alcohol-related liver failure, sometimes they call that alcohol poisoning. We have to get the person right to the hospital. They pump out their stomach and they fill them with fluids to try to get the liver back working again. But so we have to be really careful looking at this. Okay, and I'll just end up just kind of here with alcohol-related cirrhosis, because cirrhosis, this is the end of the line. Okay, this is when a person, this is the most serious liver disease, it turns that normal, healthy liver tissue, and it literally kills it so that it cannot function. And as you see, if this is caught early, it's possible to help the liver to regenerate itself. But once it's severely damaged, it can't get back to the position of health. And so how does somebody know if they have this? Because remember what I said before, the liver doesn't have nerve endings, and so therefore they're not going to be able to necessarily to know that they have a liver disease. Okay, but if we begin to see some of these conditions on the right happening, it's going to be a indication that liver disease is happening. Okay, so you see a few in there. The more important ones are going to be that yellowing of the skin, right? The whites of the eyes, we call that jaundice. That's usually one of the first things that's going to happen. Somebody that will occur. Fluid buildup, the stomach and in the abdomen, we call that ascites. That fluid builds up because of the high pressure that's in the bloodstream. We call that portal hypertension, and that happens because now the liver, which is this filter, is blocked. And so the blood, the portal vein that brings the blood into the liver gets backed up, and then that creates pressure that will add to this buildup of the fluid. And then the bleeding, right? Somebody who has alcohol-related cirrhosis or hepatitis, if they cough real hard, or even if they laugh real hard, or using the bathroom, they'll see bleeding, and that's because all this pressure begins to burst the capillaries that are in the throat and in the intestines. Okay, and when somebody is getting into those stages, they have a really serious issue with their liver. And then there's the other cognitive issues, right? Where sometimes you'll hear the phrase wet brain. That means that a person now they've lost their memory, they can't concentrate, all these different things are occurring. And so these are all the signs we have to look out for in ourselves or in others for the fact that the alcohol has now taken its toll. Okay, and so it's all about awareness. It's all about awareness for somebody who doesn't have that alcohol related disease. If somebody does, the phrase alcoholic, that means a person can't control their use of alcohol under whatever circumstance. They may go to the bar and say, I'm just going to have one drink, and they wind up being there all night. Okay, so that is a medical condition that needs to be looked at. But for the average person who feels they don't have an actual alcohol problem, you still need to be aware for all the reasons that we mentioned before. And if you need any other resources, you'll see many of them listed here. Our own, the liverfoundation.org. You can National Institutes of Health, the Institute on Alcohol and Alcoholism. AA.org is another. Al-Anon is a group for family members of someone who may have an alcohol problem. All these resources are out there and available, and we encourage people to make use of those resources if they're needed. So I know I talked for quite a bit of time there, but Carla, are there any questions at the moment that I can try to, without taking too much time, respond to?
Oh, of course there are. Thank you so much for that really thorough. And one of the things that always sticks out to me is how the American Liver Foundation, and you in particular, you take these big subjects and make them really easy to understand, and more importantly, giving tips on how we incorporate liver health into our regular lives, and
Right.
just being mindful of that doesn't seem so overwhelming the way the American Liver Foundation suggests to go about it.
Right.
So thank you for that. And yes, as you would guess, there are a ton of questions that have come in. And as Warren said, we absolutely will be mindful of the time. So a reminder again, if we don't get the chance to answer your particular question, we will follow up with you by email. But of course, we will provide our contact information at the end. A reminder, as I said, we're getting some questions coming in, so I know many of you remember this, but if you do have questions, you can submit them by typing them into the questions section of that GoToWebinar control panel. And
Right.
as we get to those, right before we get to those, actually, I will remind everybody that Needy Meds is also here as a source of support. We recognize that on your health journey, your patients, your clients, your loved ones, sometimes a big barrier is being able to afford the medications and other healthcare expenses that you need. So please do turn to Needy Meds if you do need help affording any of your healthcare costs. What you're looking at on the screen, all of care saving categories that you can find under the healthcare savings tab that I pointed out in the beginning of the presentation on needymeds.org. So check those out. And of course, if you'd like to learn more, in addition to perusing our website, please join me for one of our monthly overview webinars. We also populate our calendar of events, if you remember, is on the bottom right hand of our homepage, with, in addition to overview webinars, brief webinars that are literally 10, 15, 20-minute presentations that will do a deeper dive into some of the healthcare savings resources you see on your screen. So as promised, I'm leaving the contact information up for the American Liver Foundation and Needy Meds. And with that up on your screen, we'll go ahead and transition to some of those questions that did come in.
Great.
Lauren, one of the questions that came in, and this actually came in from a number of different people in a number of different ways, but I'll just sum it up with by asking you this way. I was diagnosed with fatty liver disease, which is one of our audience members sharing, the non-alcoholic kind, but my doctor didn't give me a prescription or any medications. She said just to watch what I eat. Is that right? And I know you touched upon that, but I think this is a good opportunity to clarify that and drive this point home.
Right. So yeah, so there's two aspects of that. One is that fatty liver disease, as I mentioned, is just as the name implies, whether it's due to alcohol or from some other source, like I said, but usually poor diet. It could also come from long-term medication use or even over-the-counter type of products. All these things can have the potential to cause that fat. Now, the reason why there was no medication given for this or whatever is because, as I mentioned, there is not any. There is no medical way to get rid of the fat that's in the liver. There's no medical way to get a liver to go from fibrosis, the hardening, the density, to being a healthy liver. There's no medical way to get the liver from cirrhosis back to health. Having said that, nutrition is a treatment. And so with that fatty liver, you literally can reverse that, but it's done with nutrition. That's why the doctor doesn't write a prescription. And part of our interaction with doctors and with doctors' professional groups such as AASLD, which is the Association for the Study of Liver Disease, we constantly point out to them that they have to be adamant about the diet, because sadly, on our helpline, you see the national helpline number there. People will call us and say, "I was just diagnosed with cirrhosis. How did this happen?" And I'll always ask. I'll say, "Were you ever told that you had a problem with your liver?" And I would say that 7 out of 10 times the person was told at some point that they had fatty liver. And what has happened, as I showed in our graphics there, it progressed. And again, no nerve endings, the liver doesn't let us know. Sometimes even the liver enzymes, which are the AST, ALT, that, these days they're pretty standard in a blood panel. Even sometimes those may not indicate that there's a problem. We call that compensated liver functioning. That means that even though the liver's damaged, it's still working pretty well. And so in some ways it kind of covers the liver enzymes are kind of covering for the fact that something's wrong. And so therefore, Quick answer to the question. Yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing to prescribe, but we do want doctors to be much more adamant to say you gotta eat right. Avoid all of the foods that have the preservatives, the additives, the hormones. That's all the stuff that's harming us. And sadly, our food supply is so full of that. Go for the organics. Unfortunately, they're more expensive, which is ridiculous. All of our food should be organic, meaning that it's not, there are no pesticides that are used. There's none of these hormones, as well as these preservatives that, if somebody says they have a loaf of bread, it'll last a year. Use it as a tire on your car. Don't eat it because, again, you're ingesting all of that, and that's all being filtered through your liver, and that's what's creating liver disease for us.
So important and such a great question. And again, if you're like me and you're listening to today's webinar and you have no now, if you're like me, as soon as the webinar ends, 5 minutes later, you'll think of a whole host of them. Don't hesitate to visit
Right.
the American Liver Foundation website, liverfoundation.org, or reach out to that national helpline. They have a
Right.
ton of useful and actionable steps you can take. So
Right.
here's another question that came in. We're switching to questions about alcohol now. And I remember this being asked in a previous webinar, and I was shocked because I had never heard this. And the question is, well, there's a statement first, and this is what I had not heard before. A lot of my friends mix energy drinks
Mm.
with alcohol. Is that safe?
Yeah, and the answer to that is going to be no. The jury is out on energy drinks themselves. Okay, what many of these energy drinks are is caffeine, right? But caffeine in very concentrated, very high doses. And so the idea of an energy drink is, as it says, if you're about to go run 10 miles, or you're going to run a marathon or something, well, maybe in that case it's okay, because you're going to be burning that up. Your body's metabolism through the exercise is going to burn it up. But if people are just sitting around the house, you don't need an energy drink, or nor should you have an energy drink. And then, so let's add the alcohol to this. Remember, alcohol is already affecting your nervous system. And so therefore, adding this highly concentrated caffeine drink to the alcohol, it increases people's blood pressure almost immediately. Because, like we said, the alcohol, it gets absorbed very quickly because our liver can't, it's not able to process all of it at once. And so therefore, this full concentration of like jet fuel is going into your system, and it's driving up your blood pressure. You'll feel your pulse will be increasing, and none of those things are good for you. So this was a big thing on college campuses, and a lot of the work that we're doing there is to try to get these young people to know that this is not the way to go. They're actually really harming themselves, even more so when they're adding these energy drinks with all that caffeine and sugar and everything else. Alcohol's already sugar, so you're doubling or tripling on that. So this is something that we put an adamant no to doing.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that question. And clearly, it is a lot more ubiquitous than I realized because, like I said, it seems to keep coming up as a question in your
Right.
presentations.
Yes.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap up with just one more final question, which is actually not related to alcohol. It's a question about the liver in general. And here it is. My liver blood test showed high numbers for the first time. Is this something I need to be worried about?
Hmm. Okay, so so this is a good question. I touched a little bit on liver enzymes. So I like to talk about, liver enzymes, right? I compare them to the exhaust in a car, right? So even the finest tuned engine is going to have exhaust. It's by virtue of the engine running, there's going to be exhaust that it produces. So the liver, by virtue of its running, running, and by virtue of its functioning, even the most healthy liver is going to have enzymes. It's going to produce the enzymes, and so we measure that. And in measuring it, there is there's a range, right? So for instance, for the AST, right? Generally speaking, we talk about a range of 10 to 40. Okay, there's a range because these numbers can fluctuate, and there are many reasons why these things can fluctuate. It's true of all of our metabolic panels when we do the lab work, especially for one of our physicals. So the numbers will fluctuate. So when you think about when you have a blood test, right? It's like you're taking a snapshot. Okay, at this moment in time, on this day, at this hour, this is what my numbers were. Now, if they're elevated, the more important thing is what are they over time, right? So we talk about longitudinal. We want to see these numbers should be in a range. Again, there's a range because we already know they're going to fluctuate, right? But it could be one woman who contacted our helpline. Her numbers were very high, and after a conversation, we found out that she just came back from a cruise where she probably ate and drank a bit more than you normally would do, and so therefore her numbers were very elevated. The usual procedure, if you're not in a high risk group, the normal procedure would be the doctor would tell you, all right, let's wait about 2 months, 2 to 3 months, and we'll recheck it. When they recheck it, chances are your numbers will be back in the normal level and everything is good. If your numbers are still elevated after that second time a few months later, then it's time to have some sort of a scan, or we call them imaging tests, right? Because a lot of liver diseases, and we talked about them in some of the diagrams, are visible. And so the doctor can literally see if there is something that's going on with a person's liver. And so therefore, nothing to worry about, the first time when you get to when you get the results of your test. But it's the follow-up that would be important. And as I said, if the numbers are back in those normal ranges, perfect. If they're still elevated, well, then you just move to a next part of screening to see if there is anything going on.
Thank you so much to our audience for that question, and Warren for another very thorough response, which is so appreciated. And I really like the way you said that when you get those results back, it is just a snapshot of what's going on with your liver at this moment in time. And I really like the fact that although on one hand there is unfortunately nothing, as you said, that can take a liver that has cirrhosis and turn it into a healthy liver, it's also empowering that there are a lot of steps that we can take to make that liver healthy, which is super helpful. So as I said, that was the last question for today's webinar. For now, I want to go ahead and wrap up and remind everybody that if you did ask a question, we'll get back in touch with you, but don't hesitate to reach out to the American Liver Foundation at liverfoundation.org or 1-800-GO-LIVER. That's 1-800-465-4837. You can also see the Needy Meds contact information at the bottom of your screen. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of the day to join us for today's special topic webinar. And a huge thank you to my friend Warren for taking time out of his day to share his expertise with Needy Meds, the Needy Meds audience. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we do hope to see your names pop up in future webinars. Take good care. Thank you.